So let's start by examining the functions of the autonomic nervous system. This video clip is a little bit of audio from a time I taught this class in person, so if it sounds a little weird and echoey, that's why. All right, so we're going to move into discussing the autonomic nervous system. Now remember, autonomic kind of sounds like automatic, and this is the system that's responsible for automatically raising our arousal level when it's time for us to respond to an emergency or a crisis. And the autonomic nervous system has two branches, and we need to understand both and how they work in opposition to each other to begin to really understand how emotion, and particularly fear, works in human behavior. So let's meet these branches. They're called the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system. So the sympathetic division is arousing. It's responsible for what we call the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic division, on the flip side, calms the body, and it's responsible for what sometimes people call the rest and digest response. I remember them because when I hear parasympathetic, I think of paratroopers, like flying in with blankies, cold water, some Netflix to help you chill out and relax after a terrifying event has ended. Another way to remember it is that parasympathetic starts with P, and you can think of peace, and sympathetic starts with S, and you can think of stress. But it's really important to be able to distinguish between these two branches of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is basically a crisis control center that operates in the body to get you ready to respond to danger. So when the sympathetic division is sending your body the alarm message, a whole host of physical changes happen throughout your body. Your pupils dilate to take in more light so you can properly see the scene. Your salivation and all kinds of digestive processes decrease or go offline, because if you're in a moment where you're about to be running from a wildebeest, it's not really the time to be digesting your lunch. Your skin perspires as blood flows to the extremities to get your body ready to move. You experience tension in the back, particularly your neck and lower back, and that's because those muscles are ready to move your arms and legs in whatever way they need to respond to the crisis. You secrete stress hormones, and your immune system temporarily downshifts. It's not functioning as much or as well. And this kind of makes sense. If the kitchen is on fire, it's not really the time to be redoing the wallpaper. So a lot of your body's natural restorative processes, like digestion and the immune system, can be paused in a moment of extreme or mild fear. So if it's truly a life-threatening situation, you're running from a tiger, your body may just evacuate all waste to lighten the load so that you can more quickly run away from danger. But if it's a less life-threatening situation, like standing up in class to do a presentation, you might just find that you have to go to the bathroom right before the presentation reliably every time, or that whatever you ate for lunch seems to just be sitting there like a rock. It really is, because your body's too busy trying to get through the stressor at hand, and it's going to save that digestion and other restorative work for later when the stressor has passed. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, it's kind of like a light switch. It can either be flipped to on or off, but there's not really an in-between. So if the sympathetic division's on, the parasympathetic division's off. If the parasympathetic division's on, the sympathetic division's off. The only exception is during sex. Sex is a complicated ballet of these two systems working together that deserves an entire class to explain, and it's kind of a miracle any of us are here, honestly. The biology is so complicated. But in general, one or the other system is in control. So the parasympathetic division basically does the opposite of what the sympathetic did. So once an alarm has passed, the parasympathetic division is responsible for recovery. So let's say you've been injured, but the moment of stress is over. Now the parasympathetic is going to take over. It's going to increase your salivation and digestion. It's It's going to bring your heart rate and your respiration back down to normal levels. It's going to kill those stress hormones, and your immune system will be enhanced. And this is all part of your body recovering and restoring itself. So we're made to go through a couple sympathetic spikes every day. We feel our best when we have minor stressors that we overcome throughout the day. The problem comes in our modern world where we're often experiencing stress for a long time. We're supposed to have a stress response and then let the parasympathetic nervous system swoop in and do all this healing. If that system never gets to come in and do its work of healing and restoration, that's when you're set up for health problems down the line. Immune problems, even cancer is a disease of the cell cycle, and having low parasympathetic engagement over the course of your lifetime would set you up to potentially be at a higher risk for developing cancer, heart disease, some of these other killers of the modern era, because your body hasn't had the chance to do the restoration work that it needs to do between crisis moments. So now that we understand the purpose, the function of the autonomic nervous system and both of its branches, let's take a look at how they're each organized physiologically and kind of connect the way they're structured to the way they function. Okay, so let's take a look at the structure of the autonomic nervous system. So we know that both the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches are affecting all of the same body organs, but the nerves that are part of each branch are reaching those body organs in a different way, and that difference in their structure has an effect on their function. To create this section of the lecture, I've borrowed images from some of these great crash course anatomy videos on the peripheral nervous system. So just like the rest of the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system depends on the cranial and spinal nerves that we're familiar with. So remember, the cranial nerves are coming right out of the base of the skull, and then there are 4 sections of nerves in the spine. So the sympathetic nervous system emerges from the spine in the center. So the nerves that send those fight, flight, freeze commands to the rest of your body are coming out of the cervical and thoracic sections of your spine. So the sympathetic nervous system is organized with ganglia, which are simply just knots of nerve fibers. And in the sympathetic system's case, there's sort of a chain of these little knots of nerve fibers just to the right and left sides of your spine. So the nerve impulse comes out of the spine into a ganglia, and then it's sent flying off to whatever part of the body that particular nerve is supposed to influence. And this design for the sympathetic nervous system has an implication in its function. Because this chain of ganglia is centralized in the body, the sympathetic nervous system is kind of an all or nothing affair. So when your fight, flight, or freeze response is mobilized, it doesn't matter what type of threat it is, the whole system is going to come on. So this is convenient when you're actually in physical danger, which is what the system is designed for, but not so convenient when you're getting nervous, say, before a presentation, and your sympathetic nervous system makes your mouth dry out as it decreases your digestive function. It's horrible to have a dry mouth when you're giving a speech, but it's because the sympathetic nervous system is centrally organized with this chain of ganglia that this sort of all or nothing reaction happens. And that's why the fight or flight response can feel so overwhelming. The nerves that coordinate the parasympathetic division's response, the sort of rest and digest, chill out response, emerge from the cranium and the tailbone. So it's these cranial nerves up here as well as the sacral nerves down here, which coordinate the parasympathetic division's response. So from the cranial and sacral regions of the spine, the parasympathetic nerves just emerge directly and travel all the way to the organs that they're trying to affect. The ganglia for this system are contained right next to or sometimes inside of the organs they're affecting. And that means that the parasympathetic division can have a little bit more of a targeted response. So if you've just filled your belly up with food and you've got some digesting to do, the system doesn't necessarily have to also turn on your sexual response, which is pretty convenient. The fight, flight, or freeze response can be crucial to keeping you safe, but it's also pretty important that it gets turned off so that the parasympathetic division of the nervous system has a chance to do its work of healing and restoring the body. So we've got to consider the question, how does the human nervous system decide when to trigger this fight, flight, freeze response? It's actually the brain that decides when it's time to fight, flight, or freeze. You recall from our discussion of the evolution of the brain that the brain is constructed in 3 layers. We've got the oldest layer of the brain, responsible for unconscious functions that maintain homeostasis. We've got the more recently evolved limbic system, responsible for emotion. And finally, we have the brand new neocortex, if you can call 200 million years old brand new, which is responsible for our logical thought. So it turns out that inside the brainstem, at the top of the brainstem, in a special region that you're going to get to know in our discussion of the brainstem next week in this course, there's essentially a brain region that has its hand on the panic button. So in the brainstem, there's an area that decides when to activate the sympathetic division, when to send you into fight or flight. And the brainstem only activates this response when you're undergoing physiological stress. So you've been injured and you're bleeding. You find yourself stumbling on the edge of a tall cliff. When your body is in present danger, the brainstem will activate the sympathetic division by slamming its hand down on that panic button. But being the brilliant and evolved mammals that we are, that's not actually the only way our brain can activate the fight or flight response. So there's a special region in the limbic system, which we're going to be discussing in week 4 of this course, which can command the brainstem to hit the panic button in response to emotional stressors. So this takes place not when your body's in physical danger, but maybe when you're in a moment of intense embarrassment. If you've ever felt like that hot, tingly sort of shame, embarrassment feeling, that's your fight or flight response getting activated by an emotional situation. And finally, with our superpowered hominid cortex, we can also activate the stress response simply by thinking about stuff that stresses us out. So with all these different ways in the brain to hit the panic button, it's pretty important, if you're a human being and you've got a brain, to learn how to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system to bring in those rest and digest paratroopers of comfort and help yourself calm down, which is what we're going to talk about in the next lecture in this course.